Hello, welcome to AI in Action. My name is Maurie. I'm here with my husband, Jim, and we are excited to have a guest on the podcast today. We are welcoming Tina Austin. Now, I'm going to read Tina's bio that she was kind enough to send me. Tina is an AI ethics consultant, a biomedical researcher. I'm sorry, but I just have to repeat that one time. A biomedical researcher.
Sounds complicated.
It sounds cool, doesn't it? And a global educator who helps universities adopt AI critically, responsibly, and inclusively. Now, you are a lifelong world traveler. You've lived and taught in 3 continents and visited over 44 or right at 44 countries. She brings a cross-cultural lens to AI literacy, governance, and educational transformation. Now, the reason that we're having Tina on and stuff that I really want to make sure we talk about is her Unblooms framework. It's for teaching metacognition, inclusive assessment, and critical AI evaluation across different disciplines. Now, you first introduced this at Oxford University. Is that correct, Tina?
Yes.
Yes. And then you've also presented or talked about it at numerous universities around the country. You're the 2025 Microsoft Innovative Educator Expert, the ASU GSV Leading Woman, I should say, in AI. And you also advise different locations like the California Department of Education, the Los Angeles AI Task Force, and the Marconi Society AI Institute. So Tina, I would love to ask you some questions about the framework, but first, I'm really curious.
What is metacognition? Somebody want to explain that to me in
Okay,
English?
the engineer needs to know what metacognition is. Cognition.
It's just really thinking about your own thinking. That's really all it is to be aware of you thinking about your own thinking. And that's really, like, to put it simply. So meta, when something's meta, right? They're self-aware and it's cognition, thinking. So oftentimes students, when they're pressing a button and they get an AI output, there's very little metacognition. And my goal has been, how do we get students to really think about their own thinking? How do we get them to understand that they can really build confidence with these tools still being there? Because a lot of, I'm sure Maurie knows very well, that there's a lot of conversation in this space where people will argue, oh, now that AI is here, students aren't really doing any critical thinking, or they're doing cognitive offloading. And my goal has been to see how we can bring that back to students and faculty.
Right. Jim and I tend to say that learning happens at the friction points. It's like that's when learning occurs. If something is easy, then you don't necessarily learn from it. It's when something is hard, that's when you learn a new skill or a new, concept. And so with artificial intelligence, it has gotten rid of a lot of those friction points. And so how are we going to reintroduce the friction?
And where?
And where are we going to reintroduce the friction into learning? But one of the questions, or the first question I really wanted to go with before Jim chased that squirrel, was since you have been a teacher on like 3 different continents and you have traveled so much, how did that change your perspective when it comes to artificial intelligence? How does that make you know different thoughts and different thought processes from around the world when it comes to AI?
Thank you. So just a little context for your audience in Northern Ireland and then later in the US. And I noticed these different educational systems as a teenager then, and I had to unlearn things that I learned in one country, and then my parents were always traveling, so I had to go along with them. And I noticed it's very different, in Western cultures. There's a lot of like Bloom's taxonomy. We talk about, the hierarchy, and once students remember and understand, and then they go all the way up to create indigenous or global South context. What I notice is that in these schools, sometimes contemplation is really pedagogy. Reverence is cognitive method. Learning is not transactional, and it's basically a transformation through a relationship. So in some countries, I noticed that teachers are really models, and they're not just there to transmit information, and students really internalize things by doing and contemplating, and none of this is really addressed in Bloom's taxonomy. And so my goal with creating Unblooms was explicitly to attempt to account for those global disparities in tech infrastructure. And it was inspired by my own experience traveling and teaching in those other countries, underserved schools. And it really helped me build something that I think is a little bit more inclusive.
Yeah, I understand.
But it's different, and I remember teachers over there, they will inspire you in a different way. There's like different values, right? It's like, how they say Finland is the happiest country in the world, but then happiness, like the whole metric is based off of what would really work well in Finland and not like, let's say, another Asian country or
Right.
so what I've
What's
learned.
what's good for one location might not be what's good for the other location.
Exactly.
It has to be, yes, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so it just gives you more perspective. Like living and working in the US about 15 years ago, it was about, oh, now I'm learning this whole new system, pharmaceutical companies, and I was still teaching them how, these pharmaceutical components worked and how that would work with their machine. So it was just a lot of like unlearning things that I've already learned, relearning what works in industry, and then moving back to academia and like 5 or 6 years ago, I started with Caltech and then UCLA and all these other schools and learned about, okay, higher ed. And especially it was during the pandemic where, everything flipped and classrooms were flipped. So you're learning now a whole new model of teaching. And then I was lucky to get to do this across different disciplines. So I guess my path has been very unique in a way that it's both industry and academia and these different countries and these different fields. So AI entered the conversation 3 years ago. And that was when I was really interested in how can I use it in the classroom for predictive analytics. And most people were just like, okay, how can I press this button and get an outcome? And we were thinking, how do I know how to help 200 of my students know which one to reach out to, maybe before it gets too late? Because I would do these surveys at the end of my class where students would write at the end of each lecture what they would have really liked or what they really liked. And it's really hard to always go through 200 of them in every single class. And what AI made really simple was looking back at the previous results, it would say, oh, like, for example, student X, Y, and Z, they would have really benefited from that help because you saw during the quarter they were having this issue. So I looked back at past data and I thought, what if I applied this to my current class? And so it was really helpful. Those are early days of UCL.
Yeah. That's amazing that you were using it. So basically, we talk a lot about the difference in like efficiency AI versus opportunity AI, and the fact that you took all of that information, you created an opportunity not just for you as a teacher, but the opportunity for your students that then get more out of your classroom.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah. Because we have a son that is a senior in college right now, and of course he's waiting for his final grades to be posted tomorrow. And it's one of those things, he's on pins and needles because the communication wasn't always there between the professor and the student. Even to the extent that he had one professor that he had 4 grades that weren't even entered into the grade book, and he went into the final without getting results from 4 of the previous assignments. And so, it's just that communication piece and getting to figure out where your students are at a certain place in time is really important. So one of the things that you do is you advise universities about adopting artificial intelligence. Yep. What's a misunderstanding that you're seeing right now?
Yeah, I think a big misunderstanding is advice that people think that tool use is all you need. Like they'll do these micro certifications where you and learn about AI tool, Notebook LM, or you take the micro certification for Claude or whatever. And it's really not a tool problem. It's a pedagogical issue. There's, institutions are going to try and rush to adopt those tools really fast. You see those tech companies, their interest is how can we have more of our products being used? And so in the process of just learning tools, people forget about pedagogy. It's easy to forget about those students that have different learning ways to learn. Like in my classes, I like to have students' voice really heard. So when they do presentations, they bring their personal story into their presentation. They bring their personal background into their work. And that's when they really shine. And I feel like AI is a real opportunity for revolutionizing learning. And I think that most companies are, and it's not the company's fault. I mean, companies want to make money, but
Absolutely.
but educators, it's easy for them to fall into the trap of like, okay, do we go with Gemini or we go with ChatGPT? And that's not really for me, it's not the concern. I mean, each of these models have their own strengths and weaknesses. It's really like, how do we first make sure that they're not cognitive offloading their tasks to AI, just pressing a button and thinking, well, I have my essay, I've got whatever I need. And then now how do we go from there? Because one thing that AI is really exposed is the past model from like 100 years ago is probably not so great, right? And now it's given us an opportunity to do things differently and hopefully better. And I think that's the conversation that's less discussed. And when I advise universities or places, it's usually different queries. I get queries about like, students that are bilingual, where's the opportunity? Where's the promise and peril? Or students that are, having special needs. So this, I feel like needs to be discussed more, and it's not discussed as much. So
that brings kind of to our next little question, and it's about assessment frameworks. So because of artificial intelligence, I know that Jim and I talk about this a lot. The product produced at the end for an assessment, we feel has to change.
Yes.
Because it's too easy to use artificial intelligence to produce the products that we've been asking students to produce. So how would you like to see that come about? What are you thinking the assessment framework needs to be?
Absolutely. So I love this question because we are talking about assessment every single day, about how to rethink assessment in the age of AI. And now Blooms is just one of them. He never really came up with the pyramid. It was then adopted later. But for example, with the Unblooms, I like to start with, what problem are we trying to solve? How can we meet the learner where they are? And how can we make custom approaches for each classroom, each professor, each instructor, so they can, find that aha moment. And that's really the issue with adoption, is not many people finding that aha moment and seeing AI as a cheating tool, seeing AI as something they need to ban. Believe it or not, 2025, we still saw so many posts about, I don't want AI near my students. And
absolutely.
And even this morning, I was seeing still posts about agents and how companies need to stop making agents because we can't rethink assessment. And I hate to say, but there is a way to rethink assessments even with agents. It's just the trick is, yeah.
Yeah, no, there is.
It's interesting because Maurie had that conversation with someone today. We, at a K-12 level, we have this conversation a lot. What I have found interesting about the assessment side is the one field that you would think would have been updating how they do things all these years is computer science. My background is computer science and engineering, and my daughter has a degree in computer science. I have a degree from Texas A&M, hers is from University of Texas. My son is getting a degree in computer science from Texas State, because apparently we don't fall far from the tree here. And what's interesting to me is when I looked at my daughter's assignments and assessments when she was in college, they were the same as mine. When I look at my son's assignments and assessments, they're the same as mine. As a matter of fact, they're even getting less adept. Like, of all the fields you think would have been adapting and changing how they assess student learning, you would have think that the field that invented this stuff, computer science, would have really been adapting, but they haven't. How can you I've been out of college a couple of years now, and I don't understand how they could be doing the same thing. And then all of a sudden they're surprised when this comes along and I can write code with this that is very good and is getting better all the time. And their argument is, well, they're making the same arguments that an English teacher makes. I've got to make them write this by hand, and my son is literally writing code the way it was written 45, 50 years ago, because they don't know how to assess it to see if he wrote it or he learned anything from it without making them write code on a piece of paper. It's
On
the
a piece
craziest
of
thing I've ever
paper,
seen.
on a chipset that was literally released in like 1985.
Yeah, they've gone backwards in what they're doing just because they can't figure out how to go forward. That's my opinion anyway.
So what's it going to take, Tina, to get them to go forward?
Dig a little deeper.
Dig a little deeper. What's it going to take?
Well, so a few things, right? I think there's several ways to approach this, and I like to go through case by case studies with instructors in the classroom or in workshops and say, hey, and it doesn't work if I just talk and they're listening. Sometimes we need everybody's laptops out and say, we have 10 minutes. We want to do this in a way, no paper, right? Because it's easy to go back to Scantrons. It's easy to just go back to, like you were saying, Blue Books.
I'm going to buy stock. I'm going to buy stock in Blue Book because apparently it's making a resurgence.
Absolutely. That's the heart of the issue, right? Is that instructors need to see that happen in real time for them in the classroom. Or one really easy way, an easy way is to, like, I had a custom GPT. I have several custom GPTs, but one I've made specifically for like a coding class, where one I just made it like say incorrect things, so the students would have to now like go through it and say, oh, why is this incorrect, or why is this wrong? And there's another one, for example, for a coding class, where instead of the student wondering what they did wrong, because usually if you're just coding, you're not going to know what space did you miss or what was the syntax.
Right.
So it will kind of walk them through step by step and say, you're close, but do you know what this? So it kind of like helps them along the way. But then they have to sometimes evaluate when the AI is going off track, because it's not always going to give them the right answer. It's kind of like vibe coding, where you don't want the AI to just give you a seemingly good answer without you being able to figure out why it went wrong. So I always ask them to like tell me, hey, use custom GPT X and like tell me what was the reason. And it has different options for them for preparing for the exam. But that's just one way, that's just one way to help them rethink assessment. But yeah, writing on paper, I would say that's more like day one. Hey, if you want to like understand this without having to go back to the I don't know, was it 80s or something?
Yeah.
At least in the 80s, we used to write code by hand back then. Even then, though, we didn't write that much code by hand. I mean, as old as I am, we were still using most of our classes we might have done them on workstations no one's heard of anymore, but we still did them on workstations. So it's kind of surprising to me how fast they're defaulting back to something that if you told somebody in 1987 that they were going to have somebody writing code on a piece of paper, they went, why would you do that? And now all of a sudden they're going, oh my God, I mean, we got to default back to that because otherwise they're not going to learn. The interesting thing to me is that you were talking about vibe coding, for example. The interesting thing to me is that when you start writing code specifically, because I happen to know that subject better than most, the biggest problem you have when you're doing it now is figuring out how to problem solve. What problem are you trying to solve? What are the components of that problem? How do you break that problem down into steps? Because if you don't do that and you just say, hey, AI, write me this, what it creates, it either works or you're completely screwed. Yeah. Because if it doesn't work, you'll never get it working because it's a lot of code that it generates and you don't understand it at all. So there's this balance between how much you let it do and how many steps you allow it to apply before you finally say, I've really got to learn problem solving. And that is really what they need to be teaching, which they should have been doing for the last 30 years, is how do I better communicate? I mean, the companies have given lip service to this idea that that's what they want, is better communicators. But in reality, they've been hiring elite coders, which are people that just can write great code, but can't communicate why that code is what it is. I think it's the same problem across all subjects. How do you assess whether or not somebody can actually understand a problem well enough to break it into parts? The only way to do it is what you were just talking about. Give them problems to solve, give them some tools and let them solve them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm glad you mentioned that as well, because, we do live coding in the classroom where they have to go. You don't learn coding without actually sometimes doing it. Like we can talk about codes all day, but unless you actually see the result there, you're like, I feel like I did something and it worked. And, and that's that feeling that you don't get if you just write on a piece of paper. So
Right,
you
exactly.
need to,
So
I
you
mean,
have to actually execute the code,
I mean, even in your the fields that you studied, microbiology or one of the classes you took, you don't know how to do things in that field unless you do something. You can study the theory all day long.
yeah,
And I feel like part of where we went wrong with education, higher education, is it went too theoretical.
yeah,
We've lost some of the pragmatic touches. What you were describing a second ago is what Maurie and I call making an AI skeptic. Show the AI, show people what the AI, where its mistakes are, and let you help them find them. That's our goal, is to make AI skeptics. We
Yeah.
want you to be skeptical of it, so you won't just take it at face value and say, okay, this must be right because the AI said so.
absolutely, absolutely. And I agree with traditional. When I started teaching at UCLA 5 years ago, the first day I was given hand-me-downs from someone who had been teaching for actually not one person, maybe like five. And it had different fonts and it was just slides, and that person was just reading off of whatever many slides. And again, nothing against that person. They were trying to be helpful. But for me, it was like, well, there's no way I'm going to read off these slides, and I'm not going to be like going through these 50 different fonts to teach this lecture. I'm going to start making it from scratch myself, because if I don't, I'm not, and then I feel like some instructors do that. They'll come to the classroom, they have 20 slides, they'll read off it, students will memorize, their work is done. That's all they feel
Right.
like they need to do. And my classes have never been about that. It's all interactive. It's all, hey, if you are not present in the class, you're not following along. Like, you're not with us. You can't just be on your computer doing whatever for your other class. It's and I'm not saying everyone should adopt my method of being highly interactive in the classroom and having debates and stuff, but there's ways.
Yeah, no, Tina, I'm going to say no, they should adopt it. They
I don't think they have a
100% should
choice
adopt it.
anymore.
And that's what exactly, Jim is exactly right. Because as I said, our son is a senior right now in college. And he was telling me the other day, he was like, Mom, I have a professor that literally walks in if he shows up. A lot of times it is the TA that shows up to do the class, and he reads the slides, and I'm there for an hour, hour and a half, and then I leave. I'm like, he said, Mom, why can't they just give me the slides? If they will just give me the presentations, I will ingest it into an AI. I will get all the notes. I will have a podcast created through Notebook LM. I will listen that way, give me the test at the end, and I'll pass the class. He's like, it's like a waste of his time to just show up for a professor to stand or a TA to stand at the front of the class. And so we always talk about how, everyone's always afraid that artificial intelligence is going to take my job. It's going to take my job. And I'm sitting here as an educator going, K-12 education, you have an easier time of it because K-12 gets to know their students. They don't have 1,000 students that they have to have in a semester, right? They get to know their kids. They know the parents of the kids. They probably taught the parents of the kids, and so they know what their home life's like. They know all that stuff. So replacing a K-12 teacher is going to be a little more difficult to do. But if you have a professor or a TA that's coming in and just reading a slide, and they are replaceable. And I think eventually the university is going to be going, let's look at the budget.
Have you ever seen the movie Real Genius?
No, but I think I've heard of it. So
You should watch it. There's a scene in it. It's
an old movie.
It's an old movie, but the kid comes in the first day, the class is full of people with a lecture. Comes in the next day, some of the kids are not there anymore. And this is, of course, an old movie. So they've got these big tape recorders sitting where the kid normally sits. By the time he's like the fourth week, the professor is also one of the record, but he's playing, and every single desk is just a recorder. He's literally the only live body in the class.
wow.
And when you look at this idea of how can professors add value, what you're talking about, where you talk about making it interactive, that is adding value.
Oh, 100%.
I mean, that's the value it should have been adding for the last 40 years. Because, I mean, my daughter, when she was at the University of Texas, she had an online course, but the professors made it was almost like a game show or something. I mean, the way it was set up was so interactive, but they weren't in the class, but they took all this trouble to make it very, very live interactive, where they called on kids, and kids, came together in the class. She loved the class.
It was a virtual class.
It was virtual.
It was virtual. It wasn't.
They were live, but it wasn't recorded. So anyway,
We did that game show thing too in one of my class. Jeopardy, and then we also
Jeopardy?
did the bingo one. We for review we did bingo, so they had to say this was from this lecture, bingo, and the first 10 students who get it right or like
That's awesome.
Yeah, so it was good.
I wish my son was in your class because I think he would be having a much better time right now. Right now, we call it institutionalized torture because that's what he thinks he's happening right now. He's like, Mama, I'm literally being tortured. And unfortunately, fortunately, he has joined the Air Force. And so he has one semester left. And a lot of his stuff is like literally life-changing.
Down to the wire.
It's literally life-changing if he doesn't get this done. We are going to start running out of time. So I want you to tell me a little bit more about Unblooms. And then Tina, I want you to give me hope.
Yes.
Okay.
That's a little pressure. No pressure.
I'm putting some pressure on you.
All you need to do is give her hope in a world where we're having trouble getting people to understand.
I want hope for higher ed because 63%, over 63% are saying now that they're not going to go to college because they're just not the higher ed is losing its value and
it's losing the perception of value.
And we are both college educated and we really encouraged our kids to become, college educated. And I think a lot of parents are just like not really encouraging those kids.
The amount of dollars I got to put into it and what they go through to get there and what they get when they get out, maybe it's not worth it. So anyway, you're up.
Yes, the hope thing is so good. I love that part. I feel like I should go talk about that first before my
Go for it. Go for it.
I love this. I've always seen the positive of what AI can do for us, and I feel that it could really push higher ed into like having instructors assess the thinking and not the outputs. And that would be the future worth leaning into. And if we can get more instructors into, not just call it AI literacy and everyone should have AI literacy and AI 101, but really think about evaluating students' thinking or like making students, like you said, critical thinkers and skeptics, or cautious skeptics or something like that, or optimistic skeptics. I feel that there is a hope if we lean into that. That's one I guess in the fork in the road that we were dealing with. One path is possibly, we lean into this, higher ed reinvents itself, more instructors see the light. Or we like to think we are seeing the light. More instructors see the value in doing this, and we're off to a great start. But if we're just going to, the rate of adoption, we're just worried about the rate of adoption, and the narrative around big tech is just, we see that often online with, again, looking at AI in a negative way and cheating and fraud and all that, then we're going to be stuck. And I feel that then, maybe like you said, there's not a hopeful path there, but if we lean into the positive, and I don't want to talk about the negative, positive, having more interactive instructors or more critical instructors leaning into that, I think there's definitely more hope and more of every school's champions need to be highlighted. I talked to different schools and they're like few and far between in different departments. When
like
you
a
look
grassroots program almost. Highlight. Yeah.
Yeah, those
they all need to be highlighted. The ones that are making all the positive things happen on their campuses need to be praised for that.
Not just praised, but also I feel that, and recently we were talking about this grant, and hopefully, we get more funding for these AI literacy grants, is those champions then go and like help maybe, 20 or 30 people in their group. And it's not just the same people that go to the same workshops. So that's another problem. Schools highlight them, but only 20 people that always go to the same workshops only show up, and then they take it and they go home and they do nothing else. And you never get to the other 3,000 people in the school. Like those faculty are like, we don't want to have anything to do with AI. Let's leave it out. So if we can get those to then train more and then more and more, then maybe more success stories. We want more stories where students feel like, I really learned something from this professor's class and we used AI, not like that person last year that was famous for putting on their, was it the cap or something, that I used ChatGPT to cheat my way through high school or whatever. Less of those stories.
Yeah, exactly.
And I
Oh
love
my
what you're
goodness.
doing because you're highlighting people. Like I love your podcast is highlighting people that are doing the work and you're already part of the hope. So
I hope so.
love you.
I need to send you some information about Grace. I don't know if you've been seeing it, but I will email you about Grace. I've just been asked to be the executive director for this nonprofit that it's a framework that's actually it's a student council. It's an AI student council that actually is a situation where you're asking students to come to the table and have the students have the faculty liaison and an ear of somebody at the university for the students to start trying to direct, hey, this is where we need AI to go for us because our future is going to be a little more dependent upon us being able to utilize it when we get out of your institution. So I'll send that information to you. Now tell me real quick about Unblooms.
Yes. I just have these slides right now, but we're working on something to get published soon. The idea is Unblooms is a problem-centered, non-hierarchical framework that replaces Bloom's linear taxonomy with recursive cycles of questioning, generating, critiquing, and reflecting. What it does is it equips students to critically engage with AI outputs, make metacognitive decisions, navigate learning in a diverse AI-saturated context.
I'll briefly go through them real quick.
Yeah, so the
Yeah.
idea was that this old pedagogy doesn't really work so well in the age of AI because AI is already really good at creating things, we're analyzing things, we're applying things. And if you press a button, it's not like you have to work all the way up to the top. AI already does this for you. Sometimes it does this part for you. I've seen different versions of Bloom's Reimagined where someone said, well, ChatGPT can only make this one. But in reality, AI can make all of these for you. And so the idea is how do we go from this to like something where students can think more critically. Now, some colleagues in the writing department suggested we flip this upside down. But my issue with this is that it doesn't really work so well in STEM. And also you're still climbing a ladder. And I feel that, because learning is recursive, it has to be more of a circular thing. And so I first started looking like this, and the goal was problem solving. And then eventually it evolved into something like for audio listeners, in the middle of the circle is problem solving, and on the outside of the circle is AI. So AI is not necessarily always the focus. It does have a metacognitive tree where it will help the learner or the instructional designer or the student understand where AI has best use cases. For example, in a classroom where the task itself is the struggle, the productive friction is the learning. So it would recommend not to use AI there. Or, for example, if there's an oral defense or a classroom discussion, it would advise not to use AI. Something to memorize first and then work their way up the ladder, create a report at the end. So that doesn't really work so well because AI can already create that report for you. Here, so this traditional Blooms doesn't apply. In Unblooms, you're going to have students work on different levels, maybe evaluate the AI's output. It's a partner for both thinking with AI and against AI. And they'll compare, for example, their own writing or their own thought process with AI's. And I know because I'm in that field where the AI's weaknesses are and where the interrogation from the student is going to be stronger. So all of this is going to be data for learning, whereas failure in traditional classes is something to hide, and that's why AI is mostly a threat to academic integrity. Here, it's a partner for thinking with and against. So even like in some examples where I give my students, if you use AI, you're actually going to do worse in that assignment. Or if you use AI, you're not going to be able to solve that problem because I know where the weaknesses are in my field. And I feel like if every instructor kind of explored that, they would see across different classes where the strengths and weaknesses are and then apply this. So students critique it, they create their knowledge of their own. In the previous model, they would just generate the lab report. And so again, the goal is not just getting it right, but understanding why you were wrong and what that means. I think that's very important.
Exactly.
So I've also built a bot for this, and I'm also coming out with a workbook for this. So if any of your listeners are interested, I'm more than happy to share a link here if they want to stay in touch or follow me on LinkedIn. It'd be great to connect with them. Thank you.
So, Tina, thank you so much for being on. We really appreciate it. I am sorry that we had a little bit of technical difficulty.
Thanks for making it possible and for
yeah,
having
it
me on
was
your
awesome.
podcast.
Well, I really do appreciate it. For everyone who is listening, we thank y'all so much for being here, and we hope that you have a marvelous rest of the week.